next work session is the finance update. Mr. Harris.
Chair, members of the board, this is a combination update, so I have a couple speakers here to go through a number of important topics. As you all are probably aware, tomorrow's New Year's Eve, so we're going to trip over to a new fiscal year, so you have some items on your consent agenda relative to some traditional sort of mechanical adjustments that we make to clean up for year end to sort of set those books. The bigger emphasis is always around sort of what potential surplus might be and what those uses could be. So we don't take action on those things. We've sort of moved to this model where we just do that in November. I think that has worked better collectively for county and schools. But we do want to have a conversation today about what we think those numbers could be, and more importantly, what are some potential uses or investments of those dollars. We're seeing, the economic conditions are certainly much different than they were 6 months ago. Mr. Durkin's going to walk you through a little bit of that. And then again, just sort of set the stage for that conversation in November, and it allows for public dialogue to really transpire over the next 3 or 4 months about what those potential uses are going to be. I'll come back up to talk financial update on Meadowville and Stonebridge, which we've done every couple years, a bridge version of that. We'll talk a little bit about the referendum, and then Ms. Spillman will be up last with some updates, some financial pieces from the state budget and some things that came out of that, and we're happy to have any questions on any of those topics. But if there aren't any questions right now, I'll turn it over to Mr. Durkin for the first part of the work session.
Thank you, Mr. Durkin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Dr. Casey. I thought I would start out with a kind of economic outlook, since it really informs our year-end, our fiscal 23 budget, as we begin to monitor that, and in a couple of months as we actually start to begin building our fiscal 24 budget. So I'm not going to stand up here. You'll hear me talk about various things, but I'm not prognosticating a recession today, but there are certainly some changing variables out there. Our economic landscape is certainly softening, as it has compared to the last few months and the last couple of years even. Looking at permits and just housing in general, there has been a slowdown in activity, as you can see on the chart, but that's not unique to us. It's happening nationwide. This time, thankfully, housing really isn't the driver of any potential softening in the landscape. As you'll recall, the Great Recession, that was really the driver, but it's really just reacting to other variables on the ground. You see mortgage rates now over 6%, which has been unheard of in at least a decade. And then I read an article the other evening, actually, that if you had a monthly mortgage budget of about $2,500, you've seen your buying power erode by over 100,000 if you were going to try and buy a house as to compare to a few months ago. So whereas a few months ago you'd have been able to afford a $500,000+ house, now you're looking at just sub 400. With that, local sales tax, that was the anomaly when the COVID pandemic hit. We all expected it to go down. It went completely the opposite way. But again, that has been slowing. I presented this at Audit and Finance not long ago, but we have had a second reading since then. You'll see that 3.1% as of the April reading. That is slightly below our pre-pandemic average. We did anticipate that this growth would slow, and 12+% is clearly unsustainable. So we have factored that into our 23 budget and our 5-year plan moving forward. So we've kind of baked that in already. So we knew it was coming, but it's now started to arrive and hit our numbers already. And then inflation, this is the topic that's been in everyone's lips and minds for the last few months. You can see that the growth has been over 8%. The last time you saw that was in the kind of Carter-Reagan era. I wouldn't say that we're necessarily at, the apex of inflation yet, but we are certainly getting close. There are a lot of drivers to that. The high level of stimulus in the economy over the last few years. Certainly the low interest rates that are now starting to go up. And then geopolitical events that have happened in the world over the last few months that look as though they're going to be continuing for quite a while longer. And we are beginning to see this really bite into even our operating situation, which has been a primary driver of increased expenditures, especially on the CIP side. So with that being said, the kind of 22 year end, We adopted a budget of 807 million, made some good investments, especially in the public safety arena with the pay plan. We came back in December. As you'll recall, we had the kind of atypical $100 million plus surplus. We made some really good strategic investments in there in terms of county contribution to the school's supplemental retirement programme and land purchases. So me and my team have been working for the last few months on the projections for year end. We are seeing that the revenues are coming in stronger than what we had adopted for fiscal year 22, unsurprisingly being driven by real and personal property taxes and also the sales taxes that I'd mentioned before. But on the flip side of that, the expenditure projections also projected to come in over the forecast. It's being driven by personnel items, the early implementation of the pay study, both Public Safety Phase 2 and the General Government pay study, the overtime costs associated with that in the public safety arena, and then the kind of inflationary impacts that we are seeing, especially in our contracts and buying materials. And then one item worthy of note, the tax relief for the elderly and disabled. Working with our Commissioner of the Revenue, we budgeted about $12.5 million for that programme this year. We are expecting that to be over $15 million. From last year's $10.8 million, so that's about a 40% increase in 1 year. So as I go through the kind of potential allocations for year end, I just wanted to point that out, that was one of the large drivers on the expenditure side. So as I said before, you know, the year end uses of fiscal year 21 were really on kind of strategic investments, the investment in the supplemental retirement programme, pay study reserves, especially for public safety to ensure that compression doesn't come back in again, moving out of leases, especially for municipal solid waste containers, then land acquisition at Spring Rock Green and Adeline Acres. But this year, with those kind of economic landscapes shifting, moving to a kind of more defensive posture so that we can ride through any potential downturn if it may occur. We do have to make a mandatory contribution to our unassigned fund balance to remain compliant with our 8% policy level. The kind of tax relief reserve, we are cognizant of the impact of personal property values on everyone in the county in the last year. We are proposing to set aside some surplus dollars from that into a reserve that we could utilise in fiscal year 24, especially if values remain elevated or as we adjust that kind of tax relief threshold. As you recall, you increased it when it's been typically going down. So to kind of, you know, if we go back to that trajectory to kind of cushion that decrease moving forward. Now, as I say, tax relief for the elderly and disabled, clearly a 40% jump in 1 year is unsustainable. 12% in a year has been the average for the last 5 years, arguably unsustainable. So it is a kind of prudent move to put some reserve monies into there to ensure that that programme is adequately funded. We have been working with our consultant Nyhart on the county's supplemental retirement programme. They came back with us with the latest analysis of the pay study implementations. We are proposing to add an additional $5 million potentially to that supplemental retirement programme. Then a kind of inflation reserve. You know, as we built that budget, we weren't forecasting that inflation would remain elevated this long or continue into the future for quite a while, especially on the CIP side. So setting aside some money from that to ensure that those projects can still move forward as adopted. Healthcare increases. As you recall, last year's we didn't actually have any increase. But working with HR, Ms. Martin Selby and her team, the consultant came back with preliminary numbers that were higher than what we've seen in the last few years. We have worked with them to potentially buy down that rate to a more normalised level for employees. So that would be an allocation here on year end to buy that rate down. And then finally, as you know, economic development opportunities arise, and as we make land purchases as part of the upcoming referendum, to have monies available so that we can strategically take advantage of those opportunities. So then on the school side, they are anticipating about $16.7 million year-end position that they can use for one-time year-end uses. They've had some net expense savings, but there has been an offset in the revenue to get to that net 16.7. The key drivers of the savings when they had their projections back in December compared to now is that the positions that they thought they'd have filled mid-year didn't materialise. They also do have some supplemental retirement programs thanks to the action that you took to invest into their supplemental retirement program. That did free up some money not only in 23 and beyond, but this year as well. So I will walk through some of how they propose that their year-end position be reserved, primarily through compensation, the air side of the healthcare increase, fund balance, and then some other school needs. This is kind of the more detailed breakdown. You can see there the compensation reserve of $3 million. One of the main changes that happened with the state budget was that the state provided an extra $6 million for a one-time $1,000 bonus in December, but it only covered the SOQ funded positions. This $3 million would be helped to offset the remainder of those positions so that everyone would be eligible for that pool. The other part of the state budget was they had a net decrease in their CIP of about $5.8 million. They are proposing to use year-end results to make that whole. The healthcare contribution, it kind of 2/3, 1/3 for them to us. This would be their proportional share of buying down that rate increase. And then there's kind of some ancillary needs that will be identified as once the final year-end position for them becomes known, but this is just a short list of those potential uses there. And then kind of a 23 update, aside from those two changes that I talked about in the last slide, the one main one was that the state budget provides actually $1.1 million less than what was anticipated. This is due to a kind of strange anomaly where the state only agreed to fund 11 out of 12 months of increases. That wasn't just for schools, that was across the board, including the compensation board funded positions. However, our estimates were always conservative with state revenues in particular, and we did see that there was some capacity on our side for about $1.1 million increase. So in order to ensure that there was that 12-month salary increase for the teachers, we worked with school administration to be able to identify that as a source to ensure that that remains whole for the 12 months. And then the consent agenda item that's before you this evening kind of realigns that transfer from us to them and some various line item changes in their budget. And then finally, you can see, and you know it's me who's given this slide when it's got some tiny font on it, there is some the pay study salary scales. You can see the one on the left for fiscal year 22 for a teacher with a bachelor's degree, and then on the right with fiscal year 23. You can see that now with the implementation of that teacher pay study, we are actually ahead in the salary scale from year 2 onwards. Our focus, as you know, has always been the kind of lifetime earnings of the teachers, but with the implementation of this pay study, we have certainly tackled not only the lifetime earnings component to remain ahead, but also ensure that, you know, those teachers that are starting out, they are further ahead in the first 2 years here than they are than our peer localities. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions or turn it over to Mr. Harris.
I have a question. The state funded 11 out of 12 months of their share of teacher compensation increases. So is that something, why, number one, why do we know why they did that? Number two, is that something that is going to rear its head in future years, budgetary cycles? It's just odd.
It is an odd practice, I will say. It could have been just a balancing act on their part with all their different priorities. It's something that, you know, certainly moving forward, we will be cognizant that it could happen. But thankfully, you know, on our side, especially with compensation board revenues, we always kind of factor in that some anomaly like that could happen. So we certainly never put ourselves in that position where we're caught off guard by an action like that. But it is an anomaly.
And Mr. Durkin, too, it goes without saying the compensation board is a ritual that it's not a July 1st increase. Usually it's December 1st, but there have been many, many years where it's after December 1st. It's never prior to December 1st. And again, I'll go back to the early 1990s during a recession. Social services funding, the state cut off funding for the month of June because it's a cash flow budget, not an accrual-based budget, and they've never made up that month for 30 years. So we probably in the early 1990s had to fund a month and recognize a state revenue that was not on the state books to pay us.
All right, well, thank you for those depressing answers, both of you. Anybody else have anything? Great.
Yeah, I just had one question on that slide where you showed inflation trend from the 70s, late 80s. The highest rate of inflation in 79 was about just over 14%, as I can see there.
Yes.
79, just over 14%.
Yes.
And right now we're around 8.6%, I believe, is where we are. So let's hope it never gets to that point again, and hope it abates, in fact, the inflation, because that's a big issue on many citizens' mind now, and certainly on a lot of the things we're doing as well. So I applaud you for the efforts and the funding and the future outlook and the ability to cash fund CIP and other areas like that. That's a great, I think, move, and certainly it's a nice chart for teachers as well. And hopefully they are aware of that and that's communicated. So, but thanks for the update and the information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question on the first slide where it showed the decline in single-family housing permits. That's based on what's coming into our county building inspection, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I guess what I would be interested in is what is the applications from the developers for new lot development? Because what I know happened last year, quite frankly, two of the bigger subdivisions in Matoka ran out of lots to sell. And so they've had to cut new lots in and get them recorded. And so I'd be interested to find out if some of this has to do with the fact that some of the lot stock that we actually had available in Chesterfield County is lagging behind in what the demand is. So it would be something, if you could find some information out on that, I'd appreciate that.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Durkin.
All right.
So the next topic should be on your screen now if you pull that up. There you go. So we have done this periodically over time, taking a look at some of our larger economic development efforts as a county, as an organization. And given the recent decision in Upper Mag and some of the things going on in Meadowville, felt like it was a good time to bring this topic back. So these are shorter versions of the one we did in 2018. But I think it gives you a nice update of kind of where we are on these projects and also relevant with what will be coming before you in subsequent months. Don't have an exact timetable, but with our plans for Spring Rock Green, I think it's important to revisit and to, before you move forward with other projects, how have you done with efforts that are already underway. So this is a summary of Stonebridge, and you can see the rendering there shown for the Amin property, which will be the latest addition. Is not included, I should note, in any of the numbers that you see here. So if we did this again in 3 years, it would only get that much better. The first one really speaks for itself. I think when we embarked on this, many years ago, we had seen the drop off from a bustling regional mall to, really just a dead property. Bottomed out there at $11 million and has since come back to almost $140 million of assessment just on that one little piece, the former Cloverleaf Mall site. So we've seen a significant increase in assessed value and a pretty large increase from 21 to 22. There is a small multifamily component there in the back, and that certainly has contributed to that, but the rest of the retail doing well. And this assessed value, of course, RBC, we have a partnership, but that's a county-owned property there, so that's not reflected. So, we carved off some for largely a municipal use, a partnership with RBC, and we're still able to, get these kind of increases in assessed values and really just the overall level of assessed value. Direct tax revenue, this is a understated number. We don't, don't have, as we've discussed before, all of the avenues that we collect taxes from this piece of property, but almost $2 million of annual revenues off of this site from sales and real estate taxes. So what are we able to do with that? How was this all put together? It was it took a number of years to do all this, and there's a lot of phases. So I'm going to simplify it in just these few bullet points. But the CDA operations, this is really what's paying for the redevelopment infrastructure. We went out there and borrowed that to knock them all down, to put in the roads, the sewer, the street lights, all of the things that you see that support that. So what this means, the plus 779, is after we pay that annual debt service on the infrastructure, we are still almost $800,000 to the good. If you put the land note in, so we converted this, and we can go through the history if you need to, but we had a land note that we were paying as we sold off pieces of property. That had a term on it. We went ahead and put that back out and, on an extended maturity, if you will. So it's not tied to land sales. We just pay it down on an annualized basis. So when you add that in, so all of the infrastructure, all of the land, you're still $291,000 to the good. that 291 covers those two items plus our half of the RVC facility. RVC pays half of the note for the day operations. We have a Parks and Rec center there, senior center, and then we have access at other times for the larger building. Still $48,000 to the good, and that really wasn't part of the original calculus here. I'm just showing you the power of what that $1.8 million can do. So we do all those things, plus basically pay for a position somewhere in the county. Overall, 90% of the land is developed there. We've got a couple little bits and pieces, but by and large, except for the amine piece, it's largely developed out. And the financing for this to be paid off no later than 2032. We have an extremely aggressive rate that we were able to receive on this because of the success. Really no reason to pay it off sooner, but bottom line, Stonebridge, before we get to the amine piece, been able to have these kind of increases in assessed value. We're paying all of the expenses plus returning some to the general fund and really helping out Parks and Rec with that RVC facility. So, by all accounts, it's been a success, and I think will be a nice launching point for our efforts across the street at Spring Rock Green. So before I transition to the second one, happy to take any questions that you might have.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to comment. I think this is what is a remarkable success story. And let me just say this, 2004, $11 million of assessment. And, and of course, now looking at 2022, $138.5 million. What a tremendous benefit this is for Chesterfield, for the general fund, but more importantly for the people throughout Chesterfield and certainly in the Midlothian district where it's located. So this is just a tremendous success story. It shows that it can be done, but you have to have the vision. And we certainly applaud all who worked on this economic development, certainly Mr. Hart, who's director there, and you all, the entire staff. I think that should be applauded. When you have a success story, you got to tout it because, people tend to tout negativity more so, but when you have success and positivity or positive actions and activity, and especially numbers that are quantifiable, I think it should be noted and said so. So this is just a tremendous success story. I just want to highlight that before you leave. And that I think, is that the Embassy Suite type hotel that we're looking at?
Yes, sir. I do believe that is the what they intend to put there.
Put there, yeah. I'm just waiting to see that. It's a beautiful site, and I think that's going to be an exciting addition to that, which will give a significant, I think, impact, have a significant impact on Chesterfield. And of course, we're right there adjacent to Richmond as well in that area. So this will be a great success story. This is like a crown jewel, if you will, of that project. So I applaud you all for that.
Mr. Allen, I should note that, we do have an incentive package on the hotel property, the conference center and some of the other amenities, but we would not have been able to pursue this if the left-hand side of the screen, all the other commercial and uses that are there, they have supported everything we needed them to be financially plus some. It really positioned us to be able to make a deal for such a unique asset, as you point out, that the means want to bring to the property. So we don't need any revenues from that to make the left side work. So we will bring even more money back. This bottom line will be improved by that, and we have enough funds to incentivize the project, which, again, otherwise would have never have occurred.
Great story.
And Mr. Harris, I'd just like to add, again, while it's flagged as an Embassy Suites, it's not a traditional Embassy Suites. This one will have a lot of convention conference space, and there's a resort designation to it because of restaurants and other factors that make it more than just a hotel. And Mr. Harris may not have alluded to it, but even the $11 million, while it was a small amount, it had the risk of actually being zero because there were many interests in tax-exempt ownership, and it would have been one of the largest tax-exempt parcels next to what I would call an interchange, probably in central Virginia.
Mr. Carroll.
Mr. Chair, I remember actually working undercover at Cloverleaf Mall when it existed, and there was a lot of concern back then when it went out of business, what was going to happen to the property, quite frankly, and I do think that this is an example of a tremendous turnaround of redevelopment in an area of the county And hopefully other people will look at this and see what we did, and it'll be an incentive for them. But it's not just for citizens of Chesterfield County, because a lot of people in the city of Richmond that border Chesterfield are coming over and shopping at the stores that are provided in this shopping center. And again, when you look at providing services to the community in the Midlothian district, it's not, Midlothian has services starting from Chippenham all the way out to Westchester. And so there's a large variety in land, so to speak, for people to shop at and be able to go to. And I think it's really important to have this. And I do think across the street, when the new development happens, this is just going to enhance that whole area of the community.
My last comment on Stonebridge, this started with a CDA structure to get this off the ground. What I'm showing you here suggested financially it is enough of a success that we believe we can collapse that CDA structure and take that off the books. Would like to probably bring that to you sometime this calendar year. So just a preview of coming attractions. But I think it's important when we set those things up, they do have a end of life, and we intend, wherever we can to remove them. The Westchester CDA has been paid off. All those improvements are done. That CDA is complete. This one has, probably less than 12 months to go before we can remove that. Only leaving the Mag Green CDA, which is a unique situation and really doesn't fall into these categories. It's not a redevelopment exercise. So our CDA toolkit would be ready to go and be able to implement somewhere else in the county. I think that's really important for future opportunities. The second topic we're going to run through, Meadowville, certainly been a lot of focus there in the last month or so. Similar run through of some statistics. You see the number of tenants has gone up a good bit, and we've got some exciting things on the horizon, certainly with the announcement of Lego. Taxable assessment value, $8.99 million, all the way up to $220. Again, this is before any of the announcements that you've been part of in the last 30 days. Over 5,000 jobs housed in the park. Direct tax revenue, you can see back in 2004, under $100,000 of annual revenue from the park. Now, in the current year, $3.6 million, 1.6 is net. Again, we have some debt outstanding there from primarily related to the interchange. It was really when this took off, putting that infrastructure, transportation infrastructure in place. The park, that's really the modern life of the park. We've certainly been there, been active for many years before then, but until the interchange came in, about 10 years ago is really when this thing took off, and you can see what we've been able to accomplish in basically a decade. In 2027, when you factor in Lego and some of the other projected income, you're looking at almost $8 million of net revenue from Meadowville. So a real strong, the strongest taxpayer. If you take the park as a single entity, there's nothing close on our tax rolls to Meadowville. Cumulative payback, if you look at our total investments and total revenue, that line crosses over somewhere in 27, 28, 15 years from the interchange opening. I think that's a very reasonable window to see all of this come to fruition, all of the corporate partners that we have there, and being able to get those kinds of annual revenue streams coming off the park. And there's still a couple of pieces and parts there, but under 80 acres, and they're cut up into a few pieces. So by and large, as with Cloverleaf, we are done with major investments and developments in Meadowville. But again, like Cloverleaf, a success, and I think it really goes to show why the board's out there looking for other opportunities to have some more wins, such as these two projects. With that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Where it says total taxable assessed value in 2022, $222 million, what's the value of what Lego's supposed to put in there?
Well, I think it'll in excess of $1 billion.
So that number's going to go up in the next
quite
2
a
years.
bit. Yeah.
A lot.
But I think that's part of the reason we wanted to do it now, before Lego sort of came in there. This is what you've got, and everything that's been talked about in newspapers is on top of this. Just like the Cloverleaf example, before the Amin property comes out of the ground, it's everything. That's a plus on top of what we're already showing here in this analysis. So certainly good news. All right, next quick topic, the referendum. You have a consent item. We talked about this last month, but just to remind you, because you do have a vote as part of your consent package tonight. And all we're doing with this vote is petitioning the court to add this question that is on your screen to the ballot in November. And just a couple of background items, as we talked about last month, there is no meals tax as part of this. It is a single question to authorize us to issue up to $540 million of GO bonds to support projects in these categories. And this is traditionally how a question will be styled. We've worked with the legal counsel to develop this. So this would be the single question, tried to make it as short and as straightforward as we could. The team that's working on this behind the scenes for the county met this morning, and we are well on our way to putting together an entire informational campaign to go out there and work with the community. We intend to have an update for you on that at your July meeting. So, just as an update on that part, July will really be sort of a working month for us to kind of get everything pulled together. You already know the project list, but, from the website to the sort of how it's going to look and feel and what we're going to emphasize, we're identifying stakeholder groups to go out and talk to. All of that's being developed now. So we'll have a pretty comprehensive update for you in July and really use that as the launching point. And then with early voting in late September, that still gives us 2 months to go out there even before the first ballot is cast. And we'll, of course, continue to work through the month of October as well. But we think we've got a good plan. And like I said, the team's put together. Schools has been a good partner working with Dr. Tyler and his team. So I think it'll be a very, synchronized effort between the two organizations to pull this off. But happy to take any questions on the question itself or more broadly on the referendum.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I just want to applaud the efforts to communicate this. As you mentioned, a plan you'll be working on over the next couple of months to make sure that our citizens are informed and therefore supportive, because, the 1, 2, 3 projects, as you point out, and 4 parks and rec is so very important for the county. And so to having a good communications plan, marketing plan, if you will be very, very helpful and positive, so that when the citizens vote, they are well informed about it, because this is a critically important project for us moving forward to get this approved successfully.
Yes, sir.
Mr.
I didn't hear you say it today, but I'm sure it will be in all of the packets that approximately 93% of these costs can be funded through our debt services that we already have in our budget that will be relieved as we pay them off, that would then be available to pay the bonds back.
Yes,
I think
sir.
that's probably the most important thing, because I don't think everybody understands that we already have a big component of that built into our budget, which is also something that the bond rating agencies want to see, that we're investing back into the community. So I think it's important that everybody understand that.
Yeah, we certainly going to spend a bulk of the time on the project listing, because we haven't done one like this since 2004. So there's a lot of people who haven't experienced this at all. So trying to tell them exactly what we would buy essentially with this 540, but we will quickly then transition to the mechanics of it and make sure folks know this doesn't come with new taxation. There is some growth in debt service, but as we talked about last month, that's also something the rating agencies look for. They want to make sure that you are proportionally keeping debt service as part of your overall expenditures. But you're right, that a lot of it is paid for by the way we manage debt. That's something we're proud of and will certainly be part of our roadshow.
Any other questions, Mr. Harris? Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Now I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Spillman, who's going to walk you through some state budget highlights.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. About a week and a half ago, on Friday, June 17th, the General Assembly had met to consider the 38 amendments that the governor had proposed in the budget. 28 of those amendments were accepted, 10 rejected. Since then, the governor's officially signed the budget bill, approving both the current year caboose budget and the biennium budget. This afternoon, as Mr. Harris stated, I'm here just to share some highlights from that state budget. specifically just some of those topics that had been recurring and things we'd been closely monitoring throughout the process. So on the grocery tax front, the state sales tax 1.5% will be fully eliminated beginning January 1st of 2023. No impact to the local 1%, and I say yet because I think that topic will be recurring as we go into next session. So as you may recall, during the legislative piece, as the bills we reviewed from the House and Senate were amended, there was a conference report that showed an opportunity for that 1% to be reinstituted in a different way, and so there was some source to be able to ensure that localities were left whole. If we see that language again, I think we'd be comfortable seeing that 1% adjusted or being considered again on the table. So just paying attention, seeing what happens. Those items were conformed with the agreement that was reached in the budget, so they've been amended. On the gas tax, that proposal was rejected to have a suspension on the wholesale distribution of gas and diesel fuel for that 3-month period from July, August, September, as well as a rejection to cap the future increases at 2%. However, just want to make note, with recent news from DC and what the president has put in front of us looking at taking a cap on that tax. So it's kind of yet to be determined what that looks like, but could potentially suspend the federal gas tax for 3 months. This topic is something that we're paying attention to just because it certainly, if it does then come back to the state, could affect the wholesale gas and diesel fuel tax, which we've got all of our interested parties paying attention to, as it could potentially, again, affect CVTA funding, therefore impacting transportation funding, but keeping a tight pulse on that. On the transportation topic, the impact from the grocery tax does result in a funding reduction of nearly $195 million over the biennium, with no replacement revenues identified. So the largest reduction was in VDOT, around $156 million over that biennium period, impacting construction funding, not proposed to impact maintenance funding. That said, while it's not a long-term solution, but certainly not an insignificant funding source, the bipartisan infrastructure law is offering some additional monies to the state for surface transportation projects, whereas the state would take a direct receipt of $1.6 billion in additional funding, formula funding to Virginia transit agencies, receiving about $640 million in additional funding over the next 5 years. So there is a chance to partake in some of that as we continue to figure out what else that looks like in the future for transportation funding. Just want to make note of the $54 million in each year of the biennium that was invested for Virginia Business Ready Site Program funds supporting key economic projects across the Commonwealth. Mr. Durkin discussed with you some of the major things that we saw in the budget related to education and schools. Just want to reiterate, while there was some progress in some of those key priorities, topics that we were interested to see, there were other items added. And so there's some offsetting costs that weren't necessarily accounted for while making progress in some areas, pulling back how we can accomplish the other pieces. And then just want to highlight the mental health piece here. There's additional funding in the governor's proposal that was approved. Could have some indirect effect for Chesterfield. Still going to examine this further with security positions added at state-operated mental health facilities, whereas, having more security around those facilities could potentially have some ancillary effect for us by, better staffing opportunities at those facilities, potentially more beds. Yet to be determined, but we're hopeful that could have a positive effect. The budget also approved some policy language on various topics, including criminalization, charges for cannabis, regulations on hemp products, and changes to the eligibility requirements for earned sentence credits that was developed in legislation passed 2 years ago. So there's some other items that have come out of the budget, not traditional funding related, but things that we're also having to pay attention to. General Assembly is scheduled to reconvene in early September. That would close out the 2022 special session. There's a couple of outstanding items, including judgeship appointments. So reflecting on the priorities that we identified in the 2022 legislative program, we did see some progress. Some of that included modifying the SOQ funding formula, increasing the jail per diems, amending the tax code to ensure that Greater Richmond Convention Center was covered appropriately, and effectively defending some of our autonomy and ability to administer locally as it related to things like B-poll and asking for a referendum on taxes. So over the next 30 days, I'll be setting up meetings with each of you all to start discuss what that next 2023 legislative program looks like, topics, priorities, things that we need to be discussing. Really appreciate your support and your guidance through this last session, and thank you. Thank you for all of that. So with that, any questions, any comments?
Natalie, you've done a great job. It was your first General Assembly session. You've made it through, and obviously, no locality made it unscathed through the budget cycle, but that's not rare or uncommon. So, no, but we really appreciate how on top you've stayed on every issue, and you've been very informative. And I was just speaking with someone today. One of the things that's really you just briefly mentioned there at the end. That's really important, that's going to have an effect on a lot of jurisdictions, is the number of inmates who are going to receive those service credits and get out early. It's a very significant number of people being released from Virginia institutions, and so it's certainly something for us to keep an eyeball on as we have all of our departments working on various topics that might impact. So, anyone else have any comments? Mr. Holland?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just want to applaud you for the outstanding job you did this year. A lot of work, and I noticed and watched it, and I just applaud your efforts there. And working with a new General Assembly in some respects, and a new governor as well. Mm-hmm. So a lot of new things happening there, and I applaud that. And as you mentioned earlier, I think the president informed us that he wants to do a gas tax holiday, and I understand now that, we didn't get that done in the state. Based on my thought, I would supported the governor in that regard and supported that holiday for 3 months. I thought that was a reasonable thing to do. So I understand the reasons for not doing it too, but I think it would have been a good thing to do now that we see the president's trying to do that, implement that. So I just want to applaud you again for the outstanding work you did, a tremendous job, and thank you for all your hard work. I know it took a lot of efforts and long hours. Thank you.
Mr. Carroll?
And not only while you were doing all that, you're also helping with getting letters of support for other projects that we had going on in the area. And again, I appreciate all of your efforts and hard work to not just to this part of your job, but the other things you were paying close attention to.
Thank you.